everyone, and welcome to Occupational Therapy 245, Introduction to Research Methodology. My name is Melissa Kay, and I will be your instructor. Let's go ahead and get started. In this first lecture, what we're going to be doing is just going over some of the high-level overview of the course, and it bears mentioning at this point that you should check out the presenter notes sections of all these lectures, and they will be available for you so that you can get additional information. So please do download or access those lectures and the notes, and we'll go ahead and get started. Our objectives for today are to explain the class format requirements, to describe the traditions of scientific research. So remember, this is a big overview. To start to think like a scholar, in particular a research scholar, and to begin to develop your topic. And your topic is what you'll be writing your literature review on for the overarching assignment for this semester. And along the way, we will be doing a lot of small assignments that will help prepare you for that. So, class info. 2 expectations in the class. One is that you show up ready to learn, even if research is a little intimidating to you, or you find yourself uninterested in it, or you just think to yourself, I just want to be a practitioner. I don't even care about research. As we go, hopefully it'll become clear why research needs to be important to all of us as occupational therapists. Additionally, your goal is to demonstrate your knowledge, again, through a critical analysis of the literature, also known as the literature review final paper. The class process. So this is a seminar style class, and what that means is that when you come to class, in as much as is possible, we're going to be learning and working together. It's one of the reasons why I've made the decision to record all these lectures and have you watch them outside of class, so that when we're in class, we can actually focus on applying the information that you learned, as well as helping you scaffold this process of writing a literature review. It's a cooperative class, also known as Constructivist, so that I am the instructor, obviously, but I'm also the facilitator to help you move forward along your path. And each of you is going to be moving at a different rate and in a slightly different way. So having me as your facilitator and mentor can be extremely helpful. Let's move on to obtaining knowledge. So there's 2 different kinds of ways of looking at research, 2 big overarching ways. The first is positivism, and then the second is constructivism, which we'll get to in a minute. So positivism is also called modernism, and it looks at research that has a very specific design. It has really pretty rigid concepts associated with it. It's a deductive process. In other words, you start with a big picture and you work your way down to a narrow conclusion. You have control over the context. In other words, if you think about research that happens in a lab versus out in the real world, that's very positivistic. You verify your hunches. So another way of thinking about that is having a hypothesis for what you imagine might be true about a group of people or about an intervention. And you verify that hunch or you refute it, right? It's also associated with quantitative information. So in other words, very statistically oriented information that you can put numbers and manipulate mathematically. And it seeks to generalize. So whenever we do research, we work with a sample because we can't work with a whole population, right? Populations are ginormous. So we work with a sample, and then we see how comfortable we are with generalizing from the sample to the representative population. And positivism looks at that. Let's contrast this with constructivism. So constructivism has more flexible design. It's holistic, so it looks at the whole person or the whole situation. It's an inductive process. So remember, deductive, you start big and you go narrow. Inductive, you start with an idea and you actually build on that idea as you go. It's bound by the context. And what does that mean? Well, environment is a part of context, right? It's our physical context, but there's also like people's mental contexts. There's cultural context. There's societal context. There's what particular groups of people hold to be true. So there's a lot of different contexts, and we take this into account when we're doing research to make it more applicable to the real world of experience of people. It has emerging interpretations. So rather than verifying a hypothesis, we're going to be like, okay, what does this mean, right? And we're also going to be looking at qualitative information with constructivism and seeking patterns of behavior or patterns of responses to a treatment or an intervention. So I know this is kind of heady and kind of like, woo, up there. But suffice to say, for our purposes, that you want to know these two terms and you want to know that they're a little bit in contrast to each other. And both of them are really necessary in order to get a good idea of how humans behave. And the whole process of research for occupational therapists is to understand how humans behave, right? Because we work with people. And furthermore, we want to understand how they behave so that we can employ effective ways of assisting them, which again is the purpose of OT. So some information about research. Well, what is research? Well, this is a picture of Socrates, and he came up with something called the Socratic method many millennia ago. And it was a systematic, principled, structured, and logical way of thinking. It involves a process of investigation so that you get evidence and then you generate knowledge or you test theories based on that. It aims to study issues that are important and to solve practical problems. So within OT, we have practical problems. What works? Does splinting or a serial casting work better, right? So we have issues about how do we know what we know. So Socrates started up this whole deal of the Socratic method. Why do we do research? Well, I've said a little bit about that, but we want to, here's the long version. We want to generate knowledge used by OT practitioners, and OTP is OT practitioners. We want to figure out what we know, right? What we know to be true about what is effective and what works in our profession. We also want to provide evidence for the need for OT services, right? So for payer sources, insurance companies, other kinds of public money, we need to say, we know this works. Or what's more realistic, we have a really good idea that this works, right? So people want to give money to things that have been proven to be effective. What we used to do is just use anecdotal evidence and say, well, I used it with clients A, B, and C, and here comes client D, so I think it's going to work pretty good, right? So we're taking this leap from there. We also want to be able to develop and test theories that underlie practice. So, like you learned about Piaget and Erikson and Maslow and all those guys, right? And most of them are guys. Now, what we want to do is we want to say, well, okay, what other theories are there? What theories remain to be developed? And how do we test them to know that what they say actually is efficacious? And finally, we want to be able to generate findings about the processes and outcomes of therapy. I feel like I'm a little bit of a broken record at this point, but we want to know how is what we're doing working, right? How can we improve? What do we keep? What do we change? The necessity of research. So I've talked about this on the previous slide. We need to support our value with payer sources and with our clients, demonstrate cost effectiveness, and demonstrate our contribution to our clients' health and well-being. So again, I find that sometimes students come into this class being like, I just want to learn about older adults. Why do I have to learn about research? And so this is the why should I care? And throughout the semester, I'm going to be letting you know why I think you should care. You may or may not believe it. That's okay. But here's some reasons. So again, this idea of having a process for selecting and using effective interventions is very much key. So if all you do with your research training is read AJOT, which is the American Journal of Occupational Therapy, or other journals, and say, okay, I understand what this is saying and I feel confident in using this intervention, fantastic. Also, to explain the value of OT to consumers and funding sources. So if we can put some numbers and some results or findings to what we're saying is true, it adds credibility to our message. Also, we may use research to select evaluation tools. Which one works best? How do we know which one to pick, right? Sometimes it's just what your mentor told you to use, but at a certain point, you're really going to want to be a critical consumer of evaluation tools and finding out what works. And to that end, we also use research to design evaluation tools and find out if they work. All right, so you're halfway through this lecture. Please take a little break, stretch, get a drink of water, come back for the second half. I used to divide my lectures into little hunks and make separate videos. This semester, in the interest of my time and effort, because it takes a lot of effort to chop videos into little hunks, I'm just going to add these slides that say, hey, take a break, come back, watch the rest. All right, so see you in a few minutes. Welcome back. So this slide was adapted from Kielhofner, who is a theoretician in occupational therapy, and it looks at this kind of combination of research, as you see in the lower left, theory in the upper left, and practice, and how these things feed into each other. So I'm not going to go over this in detail, but do take a couple minutes to look at it, come up with any questions that you have, and note, and this is what I want you to take from it, note how research informs theory, theory informs practice, and research also informs practice. So it's a visual model way of looking at what I just talked to you about in the first half of the lecture. All right, so there's a lot of different roles that an OT student or practitioner can take in terms of research. So producing research is definitely one of them. You're actually in there in the trenches making research, doing research, and you'll be doing some of that at the end of your training. Also collaborating. So the way that we do it in the OT program here at San Jose State is that you work with a faculty member. Like, for example, I have a group of second year students who are helping me with a research project that I've been working on. So working with others. I also right now am working with 3 professors who are in the child and adolescent development department. And we're working together or collaborating on research. And that's pretty cool, right? To get different perspectives. We also consume research. So we're doing that every day. So even if you're not grabbing. I'm old, so I remember a time when there was actually hard copy journals. So you're not tuning in to a screen that has articles on it. You may be, right? So that may be a way that you consume research, and certainly you're going to do that this semester. But you're consuming research every day. Anytime you read the news, anytime, to kind of date this presentation, you've looked online at something about COVID. There's some research that tells you this works, that doesn't. Here's the rate of cases. Here's the rate of hospitalizations and death. So you're always consuming research, right? And one of my goals is to help you be a critical consumer of research. So that old adage of don't believe everything you read, right? But it takes a particular set of skills to be able to actually critically appraise research. So that's going to be a goal for us this semester. And finally, to advocate for research. So get on that bandwagon and actually tell others that research is a good thing and advocate for funding for research within occupational therapy and for the use of research. All right, so this is probably familiar from your undergrad, but there's 3 different main research methods. Qualitative, which goes with the constructivist theory. Quantitative, which goes with more of a positivist theory. And mixed methods, which pulls from both qualitative and quantitative. There's a few little notes on this slide, so check those out. We're going to dive really deep into these, so I'm going to mosey along. All right. So research designs. There's a number of different types of designs that can be used. And again, we'll do a deep dive into this. This is just your introductory lecture to get you kind of primed and thinking about research a little bit. So descriptive research, it does not prove anything, right? So it's not using an intervention. It's just looking at a group of people and saying what is true about this group of people. Survey research, naturalistic observation, and case studies are types of descriptive research. Correlational research is comparing or contrasting 2 different things. Types of designs are case control studies and observational studies. And when we correlate something, we say, how good is the fit between these 2 things? We can never say that A proved B. We can just say A and B have a relationship. We can tell whether the relationship is positive or negative, or if there's no relationship. And again, we'll get into this when we look at quantitative designs. Then there's experimental research, which involves random assignment of participants. You'll hear me say this over and over again, but here's the first time. So experimental research marked by random assignment of participants. What does that mean? Well, if we have a study where we're comparing, for example, with children, sensory integration therapy with perceptual motor therapy, right? To see which one is more effective in treating kids with autism who have fine motor delays. Okay, just for example, I just pulled it out of my head. With an experimental study, what we would do is we would take our whole group of kids and we would randomly assign them to those 2 different interventions, SI or perceptual motor. The reason this is super important is if we want to be able to generalize from our little sample to a wider population of people, regardless of what that population is, right? In this case, it's kids with autism who have fine motor difficulties. We need to be sure that the people who are in each of the groups are randomly there, meaning that they don't have a particular quality that caused them to be in the particular group. So, for example, if I say, okay, for those of you that don't know me yet, I also have a clinical pediatric practice, right? And it's called Firefly Center. So if I say, okay, all the kids from Firefly Center are going to be in the sensory integration group, and all the kids from XYZ Therapy Center are going to be in the perceptual motor group, right? So how do we know that it's not something besides the intervention that is causing my group or the other group to have gains in fine motor skill? The only way we can do that is through random assignment, and that's why it's super important. If that was not totally clear, we're going to dive into it in class. Please bring your questions to class about this and everything else. Okay. So quasi-experimental. The only difference, it still is an experiment, but there's no random assignment. And then I don't know why this didn't get put on here, but there's also meta-analytic or meta-analysis, which is we take a bunch of studies that have already been done and we dig into them and see what conclusions we can draw from those. Systematic analysis are another type of meta-analytic. And then finally, we have psychometric designs, which are used for developing evaluations or other instruments. Okay, so we're going to be using this pyramid kind of over and over. This is your first exposure to it. And it's a hierarchy of research designs. What does that mean? Well, it means which one results in the strongest evidence, the most credible evidence at the end of the day. And at the top, something we call the quote-unquote gold standard is the randomized controlled trial. So random assignments to group, a controlled trial, meaning that we're trying to prevent bias, prevent errors, prevent other variables from confounding or mixing up what our findings are, right? So the cleanest, strongest kind of evidence is an RCT. Next up is a cohort study. So this is a longitudinal study. In other words, it looks at people over a long period of time. We know that when we look at people over a longer period of time, we can learn more about them, and we can also determine that what we saw if we just did a little snapshot was not an aberration. So a longitudinal study is a good thing. And we look at this group of people and measure them at various intervals through time. Let's see. So that's that. Again, presenter notes, check them out. Case control study. It's an observational study. There's 2 existing groups, and they differ in outcomes. And so they're compared on the basis of something that we feel might be a causal attribute. So a really common one is people who smoke and people who don't, and what their health status is like, right? So they're already existing. We don't say to the group that's not smokers, we want you to start smoking and do it for 20 years, right? So we just take existing groups with a particular behavior, and then we look at it, we look at some attribute based on that. Okay, cross-sectional study is next up in the green. And notice we're going down in hierarchy, right? And down in quality of evidence. A cross-sectional study is another type of observational study that analyzes data from a population or a subset of that population at one point in time, right? So we go, kunk, this is our snapshot. Now, anytime we take a snapshot of a person, they may be doing what they always do, right? So I may come to your house at 6 a.m. and find that you're making coffee and listening to R&B and you have your textbook open on your kitchen counter. That may be what you do every single day, or it may be that you only did it this day. And usually you drink tea and you don't listen to music. And for sure, you have not cracked a textbook at 6 a.m. So we want to make sure that what we're seeing in behavior in people is actually what they usually do, because that is more telling about how they are and who they are and what their behavior is like. Finally, case report. So this is a specific type of research design that reports on an aspect of the management, in other words, intervention potentially, of one or two participants. You can see that, just as I said with the whole breakfast example, if we only look at 2 people versus 1,000 people, it's much more likely that those 2 people are not representative of the population as a whole. I think that's enough of that. Bring your questions to class and we will go over this a lot. Okay, evolution of evidence. So this is a slide I added to this course. We used to, and still to some extent, believe that evidence-based practice is really, really important. And of course it is. The problem comes when we say to ourselves, we must use evidence-based interventions and we won't use anything else. The reason being that not everything has been investigated, right? There hasn't been research studies about everything. Or if there are, they may not be high quality. They may not have been possible because in healthcare research, we can't simply not give a group of people any treatment whatsoever, right? It's unethical. So getting to an evidence-based is a long, difficult process. It's one that we're working at all the time, but we can't just rely on hardcore evidence for everything we do. So there's a new thing. It's about maybe 4 or 5 years old, and it's called evidence-informed practice. So what that means is that we're still seeking an evidence base, right? So we're still looking at the first term on this slide, but we're combining it with our clinical reasoning and our experience in practice. So we have a different kind of slant on it, and it's a little bit more holistic. Some colleagues and I wrote an article in OT Practice about evidence-informed practice, and I can hook you up with it if you'd like. All right, so purposes for research, again, just another look at it. Basic, to get foundational knowledge about how the world works. Applied, which is related to practice, so that'll be a lot of what we do. But like basic, an example of basic is like there's in sensory integration, which is one of my areas of expertise. There's a woman that researches primates, right? And she looks at basic neurological processes in primates. And so is it testing, does SI work? No, not exactly, but it's testing how do our neurological systems work, and in particular, how do our sensory systems work? Make sense? All right, and then transformative. So there is an aspect of research that some of you will be super interested in, others of you not so much, that looks at how do we use research to change the status quo of our practice, our community, our culture, our society, the world, and how do we empower people through that process? So super interesting, very timely with the emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion, and access that we're currently looking at in education and in the world. And also with the idea of, we are not holding power over our clients. We're partnering with our clients, right? So client-centered practice. So that, again, may be of great interest to some of you. Okay. I thought that this was going to come up one aspect at a time. Well, use this slide, bookmark this slide, and sorry that it's a little overwhelming. I think I'm just not in slide mode, and so everything came up and none of my lovely animations were there. All right, so the research process. Number 1, you frame a problem. What's a problem? We don't know what the best treatment for long COVID, best OT treatment for long COVID is. Number 2, we identify existing knowledge and holes. So we know something about treating COVID. We know something about treating other long-term neurological problems, but we don't know how it applies to COVID specifically, and we don't know everything about it yet. That's the hole, and we're always looking for the hole. So you'll hear me talk about that a lot. 3, we identify a guiding theory or framework. What's going to underlie our whole thinking process about how to treat long COVID? It could be a neurological theory. It could be a motor learning theory if we're looking at motor issues in long COVID, etc. So we figure out what is the underlying support for our research process. 4, we develop a research question. I cannot overestimate the importance of a research question. It guides everything about your research. It's hard to write. You'll probably write your research questions over and over and over again until you're totally sick of them. But at the end of the day, you refer back to your research question over and over. What do I want to know? Let me look at my research question, right? 5, we choose a methodology to answer the question. So what type of research, what design might be best to answer the question that we've asked? 6, we determine the scope of the study. Am I going to do a small pilot study? Am I going to do a national study? Am I going to do an international study? A lot of this depends on how much is already known, what the research question is, ding, 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 ding. Also, what sort of resources we have, right? Do we have an unlimited pot of money, or are we a group of student researchers that's investigating a very discrete area of practice? Then we gather information. That's the let's do the study and get data. We analyze the information, and then we draw conclusions. So the analysis is through, for quantitative studies, through statistical tests and manipulations. For qualitative study, it is processing the data and coming up with some themes or patterns, and then drawing some conclusions from that. And then finally, we share the outcomes and conclusions. This may be through an article, it may be through a poster at a conference, it may be in a panel, it may be to your department, it may be at our national conference. So a lot of different ways to share the outcomes and conclusions. And we always want to do that because we want to share what we learned to contribute to the evidence base. So the research problem, and we're on slide 23 of 31. So you're in the home stretch, guys. A research problem is an issue or a concern that an investigator presents and justifies in a research study. So it's the problem of does sensory integration or perceptual motor intervention work better, right, for kids with autism and fine motor issues? Why should a problem be researched? Well, it can fill a hole in the literature, right? Fill that gap in the literature. It can extend existing research. So somebody does a study and they discover A, B, and C, and you think, but what about D and E? So it can extend research, and we do that quite a lot. Some of you have been in a study with me where in 212, where you did some various different kinds of homework to see which worked better and which one you like better and which one you were more satisfied with. So your participation was the second year. The first year, I got some information, then I changed up the study, I revised a lot of things, and I did it again to extend the existing research. Examine an additional aspect of a phenomenon, so look at a different angle. Empower underheard or underrepresented people, again, that political, socio-political aspect of research, and also, again, to inform practice. All right, the research method. It's determined by the research question, which is determined by the research problem. And again, we can use quantitative, qualitative, or mixed method. So here's a chart. I'd like you to, again, bookmark this or at least make a note to yourself about the differences or a comparison of quantitative and qualitative research. And you can absolutely read this on your own to see how they differ. We've talked about it a little bit, but spend some more time with that. It'll be important as we go forward in the class. Then there's the problem statement, and this is something that we're going to be working on and practicing in class. It's a big reason why you're watching your lecture now, because when you're in class, I really want to be able to help you with writing problem statements and also have you working with your peers on writing problem statements. So there's elements, the topic, the clinical issue or problem that needs a solution, the evidence for the issue, so why it's important or what exists in terms of evidence, the deficiencies in the evidence. So this is what is missing or what needs more knowledge. Again, it's that whole, right? And what remedying the deficiencies will do. So how will, who or how will addressing this issue help? So we're going to do some practice on this, but again, keep this in mind as you move forward. All right. And oh my God, why are we doing this? So I know this is not everyone's number one class, and that's okay. Not everything was my number one class either, right? But I ask that you keep an open mind. I hope I've made a compelling argument about why research is important. And I also want to bring to your attention that the main assignment of this semester, this literature review, fulfills your graduate writing requirement, and getting started on it immediately, like just jumping in with 2 feet instead of being like, da, 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 is going to be super helpful to you, right? So I understand that it's anxiety producing. I also know from experience that everyone who wants to passes this requirement, right? You might decide this is not for me. I hate this. It's not worth it. But throughout the course of the semester, I'm going to be helping you to take the little baby steps that then we line up so that at the end of the semester, you have a quality literature review and you pass this requirement, and then you move on. I think that the process requires persistence. It requires ongoing work, not cramming. So you cannot write your literature review in the week or 2 weeks before the end of the semester. You must. I can't emphasize this enough. You must keep up with this assignment, right? So that it's not overwhelming at the end of the semester. And you'll have all the parts and pieces. And then at the end of the semester, your job will be putting those pieces together. Research takes time to understand. And I got to say, when I was in my master's program, I was like, When I was in my doctoral program, it was unavoidable. Almost all of it was about research, you guys. Many statistics classes, many research classes. Then I did research. And so it changed my perspective, but it also let me know that I'm not, that's not the cloth I'm cut from, right? I got into OT because I liked working with people and I wound up working with kids. So the whole research thing is sort of an add-on for me. I really enjoy it now and I find it challenging and rewarding, but it wasn't where I started. And my main point in all of this background is to say it takes time to understand it. I did not understand statistics on the first run, right? So commit to yourself and to me and to your classmates that you're going to push throughout the semester so that you understand by the end of the semester what it is that you need to understand in order to complete your literature review. And I'll get off my soapbox now. All right. So welcome to occupational Therapy 245, Introduction to Research Methodology. I'm excited to work with you this semester, and I will see you in class. One last caveat. Please note any questions that you have, bring them to class, because we will each session be discussing the lecture and also be discussing any questions you have, and then we'll move into our work for the day. All right, everyone, take good care. Thanks for watching and listening, and I will see you real soon. Bye.